History is full of tales that are whispered rather than spoken aloud, stories buried in royal chambers and cloaked with shame. Among these forgotten fragments lies the scandal of a mighty king whose wedding night was destined to be a celebration of power, love, and legacy, but instead became an unforgettable humiliation. The young queen, adored by her people and envied by courtiers, entered the royal bedchamber draped in silk and trembling with nervous anticipation. But as the candles burned low and the night unfolded, disaster struck. What should have been a night of intimacy turned into a nightmare that stained not only the sheets but the dignity of the monarchy itself. The king, proud and stern, was left in shock. The queen, humiliated beyond words, could never erase the incident from her life. Court gossip spread like wildfire, twisting the tale into a weapon of mockery. This single night cast a shadow that lingered over their marriage, their court, and even their legacy. Was it a cruel twist of fate, or a moment destined to expose the fragile humanity hidden beneath crowns and titles? This is the story of the king whose bride soiled herself on their wedding night, a story few dare to tell. The palace gleamed like a jewel under the golden rays of the sun. Towers crowned with banners fluttered against the sky. Musicians filled the air with triumphant melodies, and nobles from every corner of the realm gathered to witness what was destined to be the most glorious union of the century. The king, a man of unmatched pride and military triumph, had finally chosen his bride. She was young, beautiful, and praised for her delicate charm. Her porcelain skin, golden hair, and wide, innocent eyes had captured not only the admiration of courtiers, but also the heart of the people. The wedding was a spectacle of grandeur, golden goblets overflowing with wine, roasted meat steaming on endless tables, and poets singing verses that declared this marriage the dawn of a new golden age. The streets outside the palace were alive with celebration, peasants dancing around bonfires, children throwing flower petals, and merchants selling tokens of the royal union. Everyone believed that this marriage would seal prosperity, strength, and joy for years to come. Yet hidden beneath the layers of silk and ceremony, an unease stirred, an unspoken anxiety within the bride herself. For though she smiled beneath her jeweled crown, her heart trembled with a fear no one else could see. The echoes of celebration still drifted through the palace halls long after the feast had ended. The vast corridors were littered with rose petals, the scent of spiced wine clinging to the air, and the flicker of torches guiding the new queen toward her chamber. Though the day had been filled with splendor, her heart beat with a restless rhythm, every step toward the bedchamber heavy with both dread and expectation. The ladies-in-waiting undressed her layer by layer, removing the dazzling jewels, silks, and ribbons until she stood bare, shivering not from cold but from the weight of what awaited her. Her hands trembled as they wrapped her in a sheer white nightgown, the fabric as fragile as her courage. Meanwhile, the king prepared himself in a chamber across the hall. Unlike his bride, he was steady, confident, and eager. For him, this was not merely a night of passion but a declaration of power. He saw his marriage as a symbol, proof that his dynasty would thrive, that heirs would be born, and that the court would bow not only to his crown, but to the union he had forged. Servants whispered about his confidence, his readiness, certainty that the night would be remembered as the moment their legacy truly began. The great bedchamber glowed with golden candlelight. Perfumed oils burned in bronze dishes, and the bed was draped in crimson velvet embroidered with golden lions, the emblem of his reign. The queen stepped inside, her feet trembling as she approached the massive bed, while the king's eyes followed her every movement. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of desire and authority. She tried to smile, to conceal her nervousness, but the tremor in her hands betrayed her. When the doors closed behind them, sealing them off from the world, she felt the crushing weight of silence press against her chest. The king drew closer, his hand brushing against her cheek with surprising gentleness. He spoke softly, assuring her that she was now his queen not just in name but in bond. Yet even in his tenderness, she could feel the unspoken demand, the expectation that tonight she must prove herself worthy as both wife and future mother of heirs. The tension within her body only grew. She tried to relax, to surrender to the moment, but her mind spiraled with fears of failure, humiliation, and inadequacy. Each breath felt heavier, her stomach twisting in knots as if her own body was rebelling against her. What was meant to be a night of intimacy became for her a test she could not escape. Her nerves grew unbearable, her body trembling with the weight of duty rather than love. The king, noticing her unease, mistook it for girlish shyness, something he believed his strength could ease away. He leaned closer, pressing his lips against hers, but the warmth of his kiss only made her more aware of the dread rising from within. Her heart pounded, her breathing uneven, and suddenly she felt an overwhelming pressure in her stomach, an urgent, uncontrollable force she could neither suppress nor ignore. She prayed in silence that it would pass. The night seemed to hold its breath as the king drew his bride closer, his arms circling her slender frame. The crackle of candles echoed in the silence, the faint rustle of silk sheets whispering as they lay upon the grand bed. For a brief moment, the queen closed her eyes, wishing she could surrender to the warmth of her husband, to silence the chaos inside her. But her body betrayed her. The nervous tension that had been twisting in her stomach all day surged upward with brutal force. She felt it coming, the uncontrollable wave of shame that no queen, no bride, no woman of dignity could stop. The king, lost in the confidence of his desire, did not at first notice her sudden stiffness, the trembling of her limbs, the way her face turned pale. But then, with horrifying suddenness, the silence was broken by a sound no royal chamber was meant to hear, a grotesque, humiliating release. In an instant, the queen's body gave way, and the very sheets of their wedding bed were soiled. The stench of it filled the air like a curse, drowning the sweetness of the perfumes and the fragrance of the roses scattered across the pillows. The queen froze in disbelief, her face burning red, tears spilling down her cheeks as she realized what had happened. This was not a nightmare she could wake from. She had soiled herself before her husband, her king, on the very night meant to bind them together forever. Her breath came in gasps of humiliation, her hands instinctively covering her face as though she could vanish beneath them. She wanted the earth to open and swallow her whole. The king sat up, stunned, his expression hardening as the reality of what had just happened struck him. For a moment, he said nothing. His dark eyes scanned the ruined bed, the trembling bride, the mess that had shattered his vision of triumph. He had prepared for glory, for passion, for the first chapter of a legacy written in honor and dignity. Instead, what he saw before him was weakness, shame, and filth. His jaw clenched, the silence heavier than any outburst. Get out!" he muttered at first, his voice low, dangerous, trembling not with pity but with fury. The queen lifted her tear-streaked face toward him, her lips parting to plead, but her words caught in her throat. He repeated himself, louder this time, his tone sharp as a blade. Get out! His pride had been wounded, his authority mocked by fate itself, and he could not bear the sight of her. The queen stumbled from the bed, clutching the sheets around her in a desperate attempt to hide her shame. Each step felt like a march toward exile. Servants, alerted by the commotion, appeared at the door, and though they tried to avert their eyes, the truth was already plain. The scent, the stained linens, the king's expression, it all told the tale. What had been meant to remain between husband and wife had spilled into the open, and with it, the seed of scandal was planted. As the door closed behind her, she collapsed in the antechamber, sobbing uncontrollably, her shame consuming her whole. That single moment had destroyed her innocence, her dignity, and her hope for a tender marriage. She knew deep inside that the king would never forget this night, and neither would she. What began as the union of power and beauty had, in the space of a heartbeat, turned into a curse that would shadow them both. And outside the chamber, whispers were already beginning. The king remained alone in the vast perfumed chamber, sitting rigid upon the crimson bed as though carved from stone. His fists clenched the sheets, his knuckles pale beneath the candlelight, and his breath came in ragged, furious bursts. This was not how he had envisioned his wedding night. For weeks he had prepared himself for triumph, for the consummation of a marriage that symbolized both strength and continuity. He had pictured heirs, alliances, a story worthy of legend. Yet in one humiliating instant, all of it had been poisoned. The silk sheets of his marital bed, once a symbol of luxury, now lay defiled, mocking him with their stains. Anger surged through him like wildfire. To the king, whose pride had been built upon victories in war, iron discipline, and the loyalty of his subjects, this accident was not a simple mishap. It was an insult. Though reason whispered that it was the nervous failing of a frightened young bride, pride twisted the truth into something unbearable. He saw weakness where he demanded strength, disgrace where he had hoped for glory. In his mind, the gods themselves seemed to laugh at him, stripping his night of triumph into a grotesque memory that would haunt him. Yet beneath the rage, another feeling gnawed at him. fear. He feared the whispers that would surely spread through the court. The walls of palaces were thin when it came to secrets, and servants, no matter how loyal, always carried tongues eager to wag. Already he could imagine the laughter behind closed doors, the smirks of courtiers who envied his throne. They would not see a king triumphant and proud, but a man mocked by fate and humiliated on the very night meant to secure his dynasty. His authority, he feared, could be chipped away not by armies, but by ridicule. He rose abruptly from the bed, pacing like a lion trapped in a cage. His shadow stretched long across the walls as the flames flickered, his thoughts darkening with each stride. Should he punish her, cast her aside, demand silence from the servants under threat of death? None of it would erase what had happened. None of it would cleanse the stain from his mind. The humiliation was permanent, etched into his memory like a scar carved by a blade. He cursed under his breath, fists pounding against the wooden bedpost, the sound echoing in the chamber like a drum of war. Yet, somewhere deep within him, a sliver of compassion tried to emerge. She had been terrified. He had seen it in her trembling hands, her tear-filled eyes. Perhaps it was not her fault, but the cruelty of nerves and nature. But the king's pride, immense and unyielding, crushed that thought before it could blossom. He could not afford softness. She longed for comfort, for someone to hold her, to tell her she was not ruined. But in this palace of marble and gold, she was utterly alone. When at last the servants entered the antechamber to tend to her, their expressions gave her no relief. Though their eyes tried to remain lowered, she could feel their unspoken judgment, their pitying silence louder than any words. They brought her fresh garments, soft silks scented with lavender, but no perfume could wash away her disgrace. She dressed slowly, her hands still shaking, feeling as though every thread of fabric was a shroud, wrapping her in the burial of her innocence. That night, she did not return to the king's chamber. Instead, she was led quietly to a smaller adjoining room, one meant for solitude rather than companionship. There she lay in bed, sleepless, her tears soaking the pillow until dawn painted the sky. She knew that when the sun rose, she would still be queen in name, still wear the crown upon her head. But in the eyes of her husband, and perhaps soon the entire court, she would forever be the bride who had soiled herself on her wedding night. And in her heart she feared that no crown, no duty, no passage of time could ever erase that stain. Palaces are built of stone and marble, but their true foundations are whispers. Behind every jeweled door, beneath every gilded ceiling, secrets crawl like serpents, waiting to strike. Though the king had tried to contain the shame of that night, and though the queen's tears were hidden in solitude, the truth had already begun to seep through cracks in silence. Servants were the first to know. Those who had changed the sheets, scrubbed the stained linens, and carried away the basins could not blind themselves to what they had seen. And in courts where servants fed the hungry curiosity of nobles, such secrets were never buried. They blossomed like weeds. It began innocently, almost hesitantly, in the corners of the palace kitchens. A maid whispered to a footman, the words trembling with disbelief, "Oh, do you know what happened in the king's chamber?" The footman widened his eyes, demanded more, and soon another ear leaned in, eager to sip the forbidden nectar of scandal. By dawn, the whispers had multiplied, carried like sparks through corridors from servant to servant, until even the cooks stirring cauldrons and the guards posted at the gate spoke in hushed tones of the queen's shame. Within days it reached the ears of the courtiers, those sharp-eyed nobles whose lives revolved around intrigue. They dressed the rumor in finer words, but the meaning was no less cruel. In velvet-draped halls between goblets of wine, they smirked and raised eyebrows, speaking of a queen too delicate for her duties, too weak to bear the weight of a crown. Their laughter was hidden behind fans and muffled behind coughs, yet it echoed all the same. What had been an accident of nerves was now twisted into a tale of ridicule, a story of disgrace embroidered with exaggeration and malice. The king heard it too. Though his courtiers dared not speak of it in his presence, he could feel the stifled chuckles, the sidelong glances, the sudden silences whenever he entered a room. His pride, already wounded, now bled further beneath the weight of their unspoken mockery. He punished servants harshly, dismissing some, imprisoning others, believing he could choke the rumor at its root. Yet the more he tried to smother it, the more it spread. Gossip was smoke. It slipped through keyholes, drifted beneath doors, and lingered where it was least wanted. Born where it was least wanted. The queen, meanwhile, carried the shame like a cloak she could not remove. Every time she entered the great hall, she could feel eyes upon her, some filled with pity, others with cruel amusement. She avoided meeting their gazes, keeping her head bowed beneath the weight of her crown, but the sting of their whispers followed her like shadows. Even among her ladies-in-waiting, she sensed betrayal. Their polite smiles concealed curiosity, their soft words laced with pity that only deepened her humiliation. Worse still, the scandal became more than gossip. It became a weapon. Ambitious nobles who sought to undermine the queen's influence used it to question her worthiness. If she could not control herself on her wedding night, they whispered, how could she be trusted to bear heirs strong enough to rule? If she brought shame to her husband in the chamber, what shame might she bring to the throne in years to come? Their doubts spread quietly, poisoning the air of the court, turning what should have been a personal misfortune into a matter of politics. And yet no one dared to speak of it openly. The king's wrath was feared, and the queen still wore her crown. But the silence that wrapped the court was more dangerous than words. It was the silence of knowing glances, of smirks quickly hidden, of laughter stifled when footsteps approached. The scandal had become an unspoken truth that lingered in every corner of the palace. The marriage, once meant to symbolize unity and strength, had instead become a joke whispered in the shadows. And though the kingdom beyond the palace walls remained oblivious, inside the royal court the queen's name was already tarnished. Her dignity reduced to a punchline too dangerous to utter aloud, yet impossible to forget. Years passed, yet the shadow of that night never lifted. The kingdom moved forward with its rituals of state, battles fought, treaties signed, festivals celebrated. But within the royal palace, a quiet fracture endured between king and queen. To the people, they appeared united, smiling from balconies, blessing parades, standing hand in hand as symbols of strength. Yet behind closed doors their bond was brittle, their hearts divided by a wound that could never heal. The king, though he fulfilled his duty as husband, never let go of the bitterness seated in him on their wedding night. Whenever he looked at his queen, he could not see her beauty without recalling her humiliation. It was a memory that tainted every glance, every touch, as though their marriage bed itself carried a curse. He grew colder, harsher, treating her with formality rather than affection. In public, he draped her with jewels and sat her beside him in ceremonies, but in private, she was kept at a distance, her presence tolerated more than cherished. The accident had stolen from them not just intimacy, but the possibility of love. The queen bore her role with quiet endurance. She learned to smile when the world demanded it, to bow her head when whispers followed her steps. She carried herself with grace, but inside the shame remained an open wound. Each child she bore, and there were some, for duty demanded it, was shadowed in her mind by the fear that they, too, would one day hear the whispers of her disgrace. Though her children grew strong and noble, she could never shake the belief that her worth as queen had been forever compromised, that she had entered the throne not with triumph but with humiliation. Historians, bound by loyalty to the crown, would not record the tale in their official chronicles. In the annals of the kingdom, the marriage was described as a union of beauty and strength, a chapter of prosperity that blessed the realm with heirs. Yet among courtiers, among the descendants of servants and nobles who had once lived within those walls, the story endured. Passed from tongue to tongue, it became legend, softened by time yet never forgotten. It was whispered in taverns, chuckled over in kitchens, and retold in hushed voices as a cautionary tale of pride, nerves, and the cruel tricks of fate. For the king, the stain was more than a memory. It was a reminder of mortality, of the fragility of flesh and the futility of control. He could conquer armies, command men, build monuments to his power, yet he could not erase a single moment of shame.